I'm Councilmember Justin Brannan. It is Tuesday, June 18th. It's about 6:45. We got started a little late. Sorry, thanks for sticking in there with us. Councilmember Sanchez and I just got out of about 3 hours of budget negotiating, and we are in the throes of budget season here. For those of you that don't know, the fiscal year ends on June 30th, so we have to have our new budget for the city of New York passed by June 30th. So we've been working very, very hard because we've got Juneteenth holiday tomorrow and then the weekend coming up. There's not a lot of time left on the clock to negotiate and pass a good budget that is worthy of your support. So we're working really hard at that. But this is the second podcast that we're doing to try to demystify the process a little bit, and we're picking on different topics and whatnot to highlight every night. And today yesterday we did education, so today we're going to be talking about housing. So we have our housing chair, my colleague from the Bronx, Councilmember Pierina Sanchez. Excited to have her on the podcast tonight. And we've also been joined by a staunch advocate, someone who's worked in housing for a very long time, Brendan Cheney from the New York Housing Conference. We're going to speak to Brendan as well. So, so look, we still got a ways to go. I said to the Daily News, I think today that, we're still miles apart from where we need to be. And there's a bunch of priorities that the city council put forward in our budget response a couple of months ago. And those are the priorities that we're fighting for, that we want to see in the final product. So it's a little confusing to folks who don't follow this stuff religiously, but the city council is a legislative branch of city government, sort of like Congress, I guess, on the federal level. And we serve as a check and balance on the mayor. We're an co-equal branch of government, 51 members in the city council. And every year, one of the most important things we do is negotiate and ultimately pass the largest municipal budget in the country. This year, we're looking at a budget that's going to be north of $111 billion. One thing a lot of people, you'll see the budget has ballooned to X amount, or the council is looking to add X amount of dollars to the budget. That's actually not how it goes. We don't start at zero and just start spending until we run out of ideas. We are mandated by the city charter, by law, to either invest or save or allocate in some way all the funds that we take in, all the tax dollars that we took in for FY24, we now allocate into the FY25 budget. So you want a budget that grows over the years, because that shows that the economy is growing as well. With $112 billion budget, if we woke up tomorrow and suddenly we were talking about a $70 billion budget, that would mean that we're in a very, very bad place in terms of our economy. So you want a budget that grows in relation to the way the economy grows. And the city economy has proven to be durable and resilient, even as the rest of the state is still struggling. The city tax receipts are stronger. They're defying all the odds and all the most optimistic anticipations or projections. So we're in a good place in that we've got the money to spend, but now we're trying to make sure that the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, that they agree with us as well. And that's sort of the hardest part of our negotiation. But tonight we're talking about housing. We have Councilmember Pierina Sanchez, who I want to introduce now to talk a little bit about her role and what we're looking for in this budget. So let me hand it over to Councilmember Sanchez.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much, Justin, or as I call you, Big Bro. Thank you for all you do. I don't know, y'all, he must be so tired. He is just constantly at City Hall as our finance chair, and it's just impressive. So kudos. So I'm Pierina Sanchez. I'm the chair of the Committee on Housing and Buildings. And what does that mean? That means that I am in charge of overseeing with colleagues who are also on my committee, overseeing what the city is doing on housing policy, and namely through two agencies, the agency that is called the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, or HPD. You might know them because if you call 311 with a heat complaint in the winter, they're the ones that send inspectors to check you out. And then there's the Department of Buildings, DOB, which also comes out, but that might be a more scary kind of event. If there's a fire, if they're checking the structural integrity of your building, things like that. And so as the chair of housing and buildings, I get to ask a lot of questions and really delve into what is the administration, what is our city government doing to dig us out of this hole that is the New York City housing crisis. And there's many, many committees. You heard from education yesterday, but the one that is on housing is just so important because New York City is in a crisis, right? I think it's probably, if not the first topic of conversation, it's the second or the third that comes up when you talk about what is it like living in New York City? What are families going through? Of where I represent in the Northwest Bronx, that's Kingsbridge, Fordham, University Heights. It's the #1 issue that we're in a housing crisis. And what that means, what that feels like on the ground is New Yorkers leaving, right? Low income and moderate income New Yorkers have been leaving New York City since the pandemic in record rates, and it's not slowed down in recent years. And we also know that in the last 20 years, Black New Yorkers especially have left New York City in record numbers. 200,000 Black New Yorkers have left here. So that means that the people who have been a part of the fabric of our city, who have helped to build this city, are leaving because they can't afford to be here. And what can we do about that? What are we going to do about that? And what can we do about that at the city level? There's a role to play for each level of government, and we like to be the most complicated in America. We have the federal government, the state government, the city, and we all kind of have different roles. But in the city of New York, it's really about how are we investing that money that you pay when you're paying your taxes, and some of it goes to the city, as Justin said, Chair Brannan said. What are we doing with those funds, and how are we borrowing in ways that are responsible and for the future? And so two things that I would highlight is that, you know, we have a responsibility in the city of New York to make sure that the housing stock is in good shape, right? So it's when you call 311 to complain about heat and hot water, that runs the gamut, right? That's checking for mold. That is also complaining about lead. That's complaining about all sorts of building conditions, including structural issues that are in buildings. And the Department of Buildings, who's responsible for looking at that piece, they've had a quarter of their staff, of their inspectorial headcount, reduced in the last year. 500 inspectors down at the Department of Buildings. So do we feel safe in our homes? Do we have certainty about what's going on? And does the agency have the people power that it needs to do its job? That's a question we've been asking over and over again in this budget process. And second, are we doing enough to build, right? We're in a crisis. How do you come out of that crisis? There's a lot of things we need to do, but building more housing and building more housing that is affordable to the New Yorkers that live here today and that need our help the most, that is a big part of the equation. And so the mayor, as a candidate, pledged to fund $4 billion into the construction and restoration, right, of housing in the city of New York, and we haven't seen that promise be met. So we're also looking at that in this executive budget.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you so much. So I want to dig in a little bit on something you mentioned about the buildings department, and you know, one of the things that when the council is fighting for restorations and funding, a lot of it has to do with staffing in these agencies. And when you have agencies that are downright skeletal at this point due to hiring freezes and rounds of PEGs. PEGs you'll hear a lot about on these podcasts. PEGs is an abbreviation for Program to Eliminate the Gap. Basically, a PEG is when the mayor goes and tells his agencies, you got to find savings. So he issues a PEG, and then each agency has to go and propose, you know, places that they feel they can find efficiencies. And unfortunately, a lot of it sometimes, you know, we don't want to fire anybody. So what it comes down to is eliminating vacant positions, which then means that if the buildings department had a bunch of positions that they were looking to hire for, now they take those positions down. They pull those positions off. So now they're not hiring for those positions, and they save money because they don't have to hold the salaries to fill those positions. But now you're looking at staffers who are you know, buildings department inspectors and whatnot. You're asking these guys to do a lot more with a lot less. So there's been a number of high profile building structural failures recently, including one right in your district at 1915 Billingsley Terrace, I believe. How do you see these occurrences as being interconnected. So how do you take the low level staffing, the low amount of staffing at DOB? How does that relate to what happened on Billingsley Terrace? And do you feel that those two things are related?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the first point that we get to. So in the last year, we've had two major events that have scared, excuse my French, have scared the crap out of New Yorkers, right? So the first event was the St. Anne's garage collapse, which left us, we unfortunately lost the garage operator who died in that terrible accident. And then we had 1915 Billingsley, which is in the heart of my district, have a partial collapse. 6 apartments just like straight, fell down. During the middle of the day when kids were walking home from school. There's a bodega down in the first level, so people were in the bodega. It was really scary, right? And so we jumped to what happened, what did we miss, how could something like this happen? Is we're in the Mecca, right? We're in the richest city and in the most resource city in America. How could something like this happen to us in our city? And so that one of the first things that we started to look at is what is happening to the inspectorial headcount. And in our budget hearings, and I've beat it like a drum. We've all beat it like a drum. Chair Brannan, myself, other council members. We've asked over and over, and the response that we get from the Department of Buildings about what is the effect, the impact of these losing these inspectors on the work, the day to day. They say what they're programmed to say, right? In many instances, the answers that you hear at the hearings from the agencies is, oh, we'll make it work. We make do. We're doing more with less. Our people are great, but we see this happening on the ground, right? And we see the impacts, and so we know that that losing 500 inspectors in the course of a year, 500 positions that were meant to keep you safe in your home and in the buildings where you reside, that has an impact. So we're continuing to fight against those cuts, whatever you want to call them. If you want to call them a peg, right? There's all of these jargon terms that we toss around here in the city council and in negotiations with the administration. But the bottom line is that whatever you call them, if you call them headcount reductions, if you call them part of the program to eliminate the gap, if you call them something else, the effect on the ground is fewer people who are checking whether your building is in safe condition. So that's why it's remained a priority for us, and it will continue to be.
Right on. And to reach the mayor's pledge of $2.5 billion annually for affordable housing, the council has called for an additional $3.66 billion in investment over 5 years in our preliminary budget response. Preliminary budget response is basically the mayor puts out his preliminary budget in January, and then the council puts forward our response to what we want to see in the executive budget. And part of that is capital funding for low-income units, preservation and supportive housing. The other half is a campaign that the Progressive Caucus has really championed too, which is called the Homes Now, Homes for Generation campaign. But tell us about the goals and what programming you're looking to fund and why. And she froze. I think Pierina is frozen in amber here. Oh wait, she's back.
Sorry.
That's okay.
What a bad time to have internet. But I heard the question, and I'm really excited about this campaign for the Homes Now, Homes for Generation campaign. So look, we have to do a lot of different things about the housing crisis, right? It's, sometimes people ask me like, what is the thing, if you had one policy, if you have one change, one investment that you were able to make? And the answer that I always give is, well, look, you don't wake up in the morning, put on your shoes and be like, let's go, right? Maybe you do, but that would probably be problematic. You put on a whole lot of different clothes, right? Hopefully you're covering your bottom, you're covering your top. If it's winter, you're putting on your coat. And when it comes to the housing crisis, there's just so much that we need to do. We need to build, we need to preserve, we need to protect tenants, and all of these, like these phrases, these catchphrases that people like me say a lot, they translate directly to real policies, right? Like real dollar investments. And so when we talk about the Homes Now and Homes for Generation campaign, that's what we're talking about, is one of these articles of clothing that are essential that you should put on before you step out into the cold winter weather, right? Or, you know, the hot summer weather, because we're in a heat wave now. But Homes Now, Homes for Generation. So we're calling for a $2.5 billion to be invested in two programs. One of them is called the Open Door program, which is a program that would invest in home ownership opportunities for working class and middle class New Yorkers. We don't build homeownership opportunities in the city of New York. Anywhere else in the country that you go, and any sort of analysis that you do on what are governments doing, what is the federal government doing to help the housing markets, you're going to see investments in homeownership opportunities. It looks different in New York City. It looks like, more likely like buying a condo or a co-op or, a townhouse or something like that than it might look, in the Midwest. But it's still that we're seeing in other places and we're not seeing here. So Open Door would dedicate money and funds from the government to actually fund homeownership opportunities. And what we're talking about at this level of investment would triple the amount of affordable homeownership opportunities in the city of New York. And then there's neighborhood pillars. Neighborhood pillars is, I'm sorry, we're not supposed to have favorites, and I'm not supposed to have favorites, but neighborhood pillars is one of the programs that I'm really excited about, because it's a preservation program. And like I said, we have 3 million homes in the city of New York. A lot of them are older. A lot of them were built before the 1970s, and time is catching up with these buildings. And in some cases, you have landlords who are trying their best, and they want to do right by their tenants. They want to do right by their properties, but they need some help. And in other cases, you have derelict landlords who make the choice to neglect their properties, right? Who made their decision to become an owner based on speculation and based on turning a profit. And so when we talk about those kind of landlords that don't really have, they really shouldn't be in the business of housing people, of being the provider for people's homes, then something like neighborhood pillars comes into play, where it allows nonprofits to receive support in order to become, to petition and to become owners of these properties, fix them up and keep them affordable forever, right, in perpetuity, because they're mission-driven organizations. So these two programs combined get at two key pieces of the solutions to the housing crisis that we have in the city, which is, one, giving people the ability to own a home and be here for the long term and own a piece of New York City, even if it's in the air because it's a co-op, even if it's a shoebox in the air, that's still owning a piece of New York City, right? That's the Open Door part of it, or the neighborhood pillars part of it, which is really about preserving the stock that we have now, transferring in the nice way, in an incentive and carrots given way, transferring ownership to mission-driven organizations that will help to keep these homes affordable for a long time.
Now, I know the mayor, had a real moonshot housing goals, and wouldn't the council proposals help the city not only address that affordability crisis, but also help the mayor reach his own moonshot goals?
Yeah, we're talking about through these two programs, this set of $2.5 billion investments, we're talking about creating thousands and thousands of new apartments through Open Door, and preserving thousands more through neighborhood pillars. So it would help. The mayor's talking about wanting that moonshot goal of creating 500,000 apartments or homes by 2030. And we're not going to get there if we're not willing to dedicate a sizable percentage or portion of the New York City capital budget, which Justin can tell us more about, versus the expense budget. But if we're not willing to dedicate a significantly higher amount of funds into these priorities.
Now, I want to go back to supportive housing, which often gets overlooked in the conversation about addressing our housing crisis and our affordability crisis. At a moment where we're seeing record high homelessness in the city, it can seem like we're short of solutions, but I know the council certainly believes, and something I know you talk a lot about, is bolstering our supportive housing infrastructure, because it's another tool in our arsenal. So could you talk about the challenges supportive housing funding is facing and how our funding can push to resolve some of those issues. I asked the tough questions, and then this is Pierina, hopefully you'll thaw out in a second and you can answer this question. Obviously a big priority for this council, supportive housing. It's really a critical tool for our unsheltered New Yorkers, and New Yorkers dealing with mental illness, substance abuse disorders, and others that are simply faced with the challenge of securing a stable place to live. And not only that, but wraparound services, right? Not just a place to lay your head, but also a place that you can that you can get the services you need. I know that in with the funding necessary to build by 2028 has not been allocated in the executive budget. So the council right now, we're seeking nearly $60 million in expense and capital funds to improve scattered site units and align service and operating rates to 110% of fair market rent and congregate levels, to bring the program towards a stronger foundation for success. And if I think Chair Sanchez would agree that if our city really wants to stop the cycles of homelessness and people living on the street and get our fellow New Yorkers and our neighbors into stable housing and get them the support they need, then supportive housing is really truly an area that we need to invest in. Chair Sanchez, you know that stuff way better than I do. Do you want to say anything more about that?
No, I think you nailed it exactly as I would have put it. I mean, I just highlight just the importance of making these investments into supportive housing, right? In the long term, we're saving at least $10,000 per person on average in housing them in an appropriate setting, right? And that goes everywhere from keeping folks off the street in a permanent and stable setting to making sure that they receive. Okay? And making sure that they receive the proper care and that they are avoiding costly emergency room visits, right? So these investments are really important, and we really need to see the administration put the funds behind the promises that they're making. 15 supportive housing is really important. We need to see those 15,000 supportive housing units come online in time.
Last thing I'll say, and then I want to get to Brendan, but I think, I think a point you made earlier too about, getting dressed in the morning. Part of the challenge is, every year that we're not investing, it's longer, it sets us back even further because it takes time for this money to bloom. It takes time for housing units to come online, from putting a shovel on the ground to someone actually opening the door and you're handing them the keys. So the longer we wait, the worse it's going to get, the worse this crisis is going to get. And what I say a lot too is that, the cost of doing nothing is really expensive, right? The longer we stall on this and deliberate and whatever it may be, the more expensive this stuff is going to get. So I want to now introduce Brendan Cheney from the New York Housing Conference. Brendan has really been a stalwart housing advocate for a long time, and someone that the council relies on to fact check our data and make sure that we're asking for the right things and fighting for the right things to make sure that the money we're looking to secure would actually equal real results on the ground in responding to our city's housing crisis. So Brendan, thank you so much for coming on tonight, and introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me. Like you said, I'm Brendan Cheney. I'm the Director of Policy and Operations at the New York Housing Conference. We're an affordable housing advocacy organization, advocating for more resources and better policy for housing at the city, state, and federal level, but all with a focus on improving policy and getting more resources for New York State, and New York City.
So what is your take on the New York Housing Conference? What's your take and your analysis on the executive budget?
So we looked at the executive budget, and we found that the $2.1 billion that is in the housing capital budget for next year is not enough to maintain the sort of historic level of affordable housing production, right? With rising costs, rising interest rates, that like the 2.1 billion is not enough to maintain historic production. We found that instead it would lead to a 32% decrease in the number of units financed with capital subsidy next year. And this includes reducing by half the number of new construction units, right? So you think about like affordable housing production, they count the units that are preserved, units that maintain affordability or get improvements to to improve conditions, and units that are newly built, right? And so this level of funding would lead to 32% less overall, but it would reduce new construction by half compared to what we're used to historically in sort of the last 5 years. And so just in numbers, we're seeing likely 4,600 fewer units of affordable housing financed next year, given the current level of funding. We also noted that, HPD has a pipeline of 750 projects that needs funding for affordable housing. And so, we really need to be maintaining funding rather than shrinking funding and shrinking production.
So at our budget hearing, you testified about the call for an additional $1 billion investment in our housing budget. Could you break that down for us and what that would look like?
Yes. So based on our analysis, we called for $1 billion next year added to the city's housing capital budget. And again, just sort of distinguish the capital budget, the operating budget funds like staff and like ongoing services, whereas the capital budget is what funds long-term projects like affordable housing construction, affordable housing preservation, things like that. So we estimate that the city needs to add 812 million just to maintain current production levels, right? To maintain the same number of affordable housing units that they produce historically. And that includes 480 million for new construction programs, almost 200 million for special needs housing programs, which is like supportive housing that you guys just talked about, also senior housing, and then 135 million for subsidized preservation programs. And then we also called for an additional 187 million to help address the pipeline, right? So, we've got this 800 million that would allow for production to continue as it has been, and then this additional 187 million would help produce a little bit more and help clear that pipeline, bring more units that are just waiting years and years and years for funding to make progress.
So what did you have any other takeaways from the hearing or stuff you heard from HPD or buildings that interested you or concerned you?
I mean, I think first of all, I was disappointed that the way the city characterized our report and our research, they sort of said that we got it wrong. And, I think we found that disappointing, but also, we stand by our analysis, right? And I think like if you look at the numbers, the $2.1 billion isn't enough. If you look at sort of current subsidy levels, you look at how much they're producing and how much it costs in subsidy per unit, I think it's very clear there's not enough money in there. The commissioner did say that they would, they can hit their target in the mayor's management report, but that target is less than historical production. So we're just going to keep, advocating and hold our feet to the fire to make sure that we don't have less production than we have historically, and that we really should have more production.
What are some of the roadblocks at the moment? Is it the constant fight over funding, or the moonshot goal? How much further away does that actually get the longer that we're stalling on investing and doubling down on housing production?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple things. I think that yes, every year that we decrease production is fewer units that of affordable housing, fewer units of housing than we need, and it means we're farther away from the goal, and we get farther away because the goal is going to keep growing because people are going to want to keep coming here. I think that in terms of roadblocks, I'd say there's sort of three things. One is government funding, two is agency staffing, and three is zoning changes in terms of like what are the things that are in the way to like really getting the housing we need and the affordable housing we need. The government funding, it's a city funding we just talked about. And I do want to make a plug for federal funding, right? So much of our housing, our affordable housing, is funded with federal funds. Not to throw an acronym out there, but the low income housing tax credit is a huge source of affordable housing funding nationwide. the city uses it and the state uses it. It's a major source of funding, but it's capped. And so what we've been advocating for is a change to, in a sense, increase the cap, in a sense, increase the amount of low-income housing tax credits we can use in the city, because we use all those tax credits, and if we want to do more housing, we need more tax credits. Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries got it in a House bill. It passed the House. We're very grateful for Jeffries' support on that. And in the Senate, Senate Majority Leader Schumer has been fighting for it, has demanded that it stay in the Senate tax bill. That bill hasn't passed yet, but we're grateful for his support. But like that would make a huge difference, because more federal resources means we can build more housing. We pair the city subsidy with that. Staffing we talked about, right? We've been tracking staffing since the pandemic. Fortunately, HPD overall has staffing levels that are back to pre-pandemic levels, right? There was a huge decrease. They produced less affordable housing when there was a staffing decrease. They're back to where they were overall, but we're still looking to make sure, do they have staffing where they need to be in each division? It's hard to see that, but we're really trying to make sure that's the case in terms of code enforcement, housing preservation, things like that. And then just the last thing is zoning. I think the mayor's moonshot goal requires market rate housing as well to reach the goal, and we want to see ways to increase market rate housing. We're big supporters of the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. It can allow more housing. It allows more housing in all neighborhoods, right? That's really the big push, because I'll give a plug for our New York City housing tracker. We look at where we're building affordable housing in the city, and we found very clearly that certain districts are building more housing than others. And so you can make some zoning changes that would allow for more neighborhoods to contribute more housing, especially lower density neighborhoods. And that's an important way to add housing, and in some cases add housing that's not subsidized and affordable, but would be pretty close to affordable without subsidy.
Are there any other housing priorities that we're not focusing on that we should look more into?
I don't think so. I mean, I think really focusing on the capital budget, making sure there's enough funding, making sure there's enough staffing, and I would say really pushing on the on zoning changes too, to make sure that we're adding supply so that we have not just subsidized housing, but other types of housing. I mean, just one more plug on that. It's that nearly half of people with Section 8 vouchers can't find housing with their voucher, right? I think that's a big sign that our homelessness programs are less successful, because we have a really restricted overall housing supply, and adding housing can help with that.
Sure. And I think too, I think certainly at all income bands, right? I mean, we're not just talking about low income housing. We're talking about housing, and we need all sorts of housing.
That's right. Yep.
Chair Sanchez, do you have anything you want to close us out with?
Yeah, I just, to follow up on what Brendan just said, just again emphasize that we have to do it all, right? We have to preserve, we have to build more, as Brendan mentioned, through zoning changes, but we're talking about the budget, so those increased investments in the capital budget, and we have to protect tenants. And just just want to share with New Yorkers that we're trying. we're really, at the city council, we're a co-equal branch of government. We're a counterweight. We're supposed to be. We are a counterweight to the mayor. There are no kings and queens in New York City. There are a lot of democratically elected people, and we all have a role to play here. And that's what we're really trying to do with this budget process, but also through the policies that we're pushing, right? So there was a great hearing earlier today. If you missed it, check it out. Chair Brannan, had a hearing on reauthorizing the lien sale, which is a whole nother can of worms. But there's just to say that there are a lot of different policies and programs that we're pushing, and it's all toward this goal of meeting the moment, meeting the challenge of addressing the housing crisis.
Right on.
And I just want to say, as an outsider, not an elected official, but as an advocate, we really haven't had as strong of an allies as we do right now, pushing for affordable housing funding. And just have been so grateful for the support from the City Council, from Speaker Adams, from Chair Brannan, from Chair Sanchez. Really appreciate you guys really pushing hard for more resources and the resources we need for affordable housing. So we're just very grateful.
Right on. Yeah, look, this, we're all trying to push forward for the success of the future of the city. I mean, that's ultimately, I like to believe on my more hopeful and optimistic days that we all want to get to the same place. Sometimes it's just a matter of how we get there. But fighting for our priorities in this budget, and as I always say every year when the council releases our budget response, those are a list of our priorities that, as the co-equal branch of government, we want to see reflected in that final document, right? And this isn't a monarchy, right? We are a co-equal branch of government, and it's our job to be a check and balance on the executive branch, on the administration side. And we want agencies to succeed. We hear from commissioners all the time about, they could stand to benefit from some more staff and a better budget so they can process, housing applications, right? It's not just about building inspectors or the construction workers. It's also folks who are processing applications behind the scenes that are very, very important and crucial to processing vouchers and getting folks into housing. So I want to thank you guys for joining us. Chair Sanchez, always a pleasure. I'll probably see you tomorrow back in the budget negotiations. Brendan, appreciate all that you do and always being there as a resource for the council and helping us out to finely tune some of our priorities to try to get the most bang for our buck. It's super important to us as well. So thanks for joining us, everyone watching, listening at home. This will be up on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Apple Podcasts, wherever your favorite podcasts are available. There should be some more episodes of Council Insider in the days to come as we head towards June 30th to pass the FY25 budget. And from 250 Broadway, this is Councilman Brannan signing off. Have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.